early returns in the 2024 election signal gains for Democrats in Olympia, initiative losses, and Republicans holding ground in the newest legislative district. Hello and welcome to The Impact. I'm Mike McClanahan. It's the day after the 2024 election. There are still a lot of votes left to be counted, but early returns show some decisive leads in certain contests. The Associated Press has called the governor's race for Democratic candidate Bob Ferguson, who appears to have an insurmountable lead over the Republican candidate Dave Reichert. In the Attorney General's race, Democratic candidate Nick Brown is also leading the Republican candidate Pete Serrano by similar margins. The race for Commissioner of Public Lands is a little bit closer, but Democratic candidate Dave Upthegrove is way out in front of Republican candidate Jamie Herrera Butler. The Democratic and incumbent candidates are also ahead in the contests for Secretary of State, Lieutenant Governor, State Auditor, State Treasurer, Insurance Commissioner, and the Superintendent of Public Instruction. Based on early returns, voters appear to have rejected 3 of the 4 initiatives on the ballot this year. However, the Natural Gas Preservation Initiative 2066 has the lead, with votes still coming in. In the legislature, Democrats currently hold strong majorities in both chambers. In the Washington House of Representatives, Democrats control 58 seats, Republicans control 40 seats. In the state Senate, Democrats hold 28 seats and Republicans hold 20 seats. There is one vacant seat that was held by Democratic Senator Kevin Vandeweghe, who announced his resignation in October. All 98 House seats are up for election this year. 25 of the 49 state Senate seats are also up for election this year. There are a number of close races in various districts, and none of the election results are final. Percentages could change significantly. Joining me now, Democratic political consultant Sandeep Kaushik of Sound View Strategies and Republican political consultant Justin Matheson of Axiom Strategies. Thank you both for your time today. I want to hear both of you weigh in on your major takeaways first to get us rolling here. Sandeep, let's start with you. What are your big takeaways from election night?
Yeah, well, I would say there's a lot to process, obviously, a big election night, but I would say that if anything, as the rest of the country turned red or got redder, Washington State got bluer. We had a very good night for Democrats in Washington State, and I think we had a vote that very reasonably can be taken as an endorsement of Democratic governance and Democratic majorities in Olympia over the last few election cycles.
And what's your perspective, Justin?
Well, if we've heard the term the blue wall over and over again, the blue wall states, and I agree with Sandeep. Essentially, but the blue wall has moved. It's moved to the Cascades, so pretty much everything west of the Cascades has kind of solidified more hard Democrat. And we'll go into more details on the resources and money that were put into some of these races on the west side that kind of offset that, but there's still a lot to be seen too as well. We've got, from our ballot counts, we had a ton of people turning ballots in on election day, so a lot of things are going to be undecided. We're right now on paper over 700,000 ballots out, but by today's count, we'll probably be at 1 million, which is almost 20% of our electorate. So things could shift.
So again, yeah, this is being recorded the day after the election here. So, you mentioned the sort of a sign of approval from voters for Democratic governance in Washington. The initiatives have been a major focal point this year. You did some work for the Defeat the Initiatives campaigns. You can be more specific about that. These were framed as sort of a referendum on Governor Inslee's environmental legacy and on some of the signature policies that have come out of Democratic-led legislature here in Olympia in the last several years. And at this point, 3 of those appear way down, and one of those is passing, but narrowly at this point. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I was part of Defend Washington, which was the coalition that came together to oppose all 4 of the initiatives as a slate, and then there were also individual no campaigns for each of the initiatives. But yeah, we were really, really pleased with the results. This was an effort led by Brian Haywood, a hedge fund manager who put in $6 million of his own money, really to roll back what were the signature Democratic achievements of the legislature in recent years and recent election cycles, whether it's repealing the capital gains tax, which raised hundreds of millions of dollars, right, going to education and child care, or whether it was, repealing the Climate Commitment Act, which was, a signature Inslee policy, right, to create a cap and invest system here in Washington State, or to repeal the public long-term care program. All of those went down in flames. We beat them handily, and I think, and so I think that is a ratification of the direction that Democratic majorities have taken in Olympia in recent years.
What's your perspective on the initiative?
Well, I think it was a referendum on donors. I know there's one. They talk about Brian Haywood as the one billionaire involved in the yes side, but essentially when it came down to it, the no side spent $45 million. The yes side spent $6 million in advertising, and that is just a bridge too far to pass a measure. And we saw it even on the ground level during the campaigns, because the media was so heavy on the other side. It really confused a lot of the voters, the language, the way it was written. And so when it got down to it, like if you're somebody knocking on a door and they're asking you questions about the initiatives and you have to explain them, you're essentially already losing. So and they did a really good job of explaining their side. So.
One thing that I think would be of interest to the audience for TVW is one of the changes this year in the initiative process was the addition of what's called the PID statement to the ballot language, right? It's the Public Investment Impact Disclosure, and it's essentially a one-sentence fiscal impact statement. This measure, if it passes, would reduce funding for education, early learning, which is the one that the language was something like that on 2109. And that language, our polling shows, moves voters a net 15-point plus to the negative, right? Because it gives them a sense of the trade-offs involved in cutting their taxes. Oh, I might want to cut my taxes, but wait, do I really want to cut funding for schools?
It just needs to go a little bit farther and explain to the individual what the impact of their taxes would be if it doesn't go through.
Oh, and I should mention that I think on our side we spent about 35 million, not 45, but what's 10
I said
million?
35, yes.
What's 10 million between friends, right?
So what about statewide state legislative races in particular? I know there's some interesting congressional races, but let's talk about Olympia and the future down here. Actually, Justin, let's start with you. What do you think are the major takeaways at this point?
Well, I just, in general, this election, you're going to see a completely different faces. There even in the more Republican seats and the Democrat seats, we have a lot of freshman members coming in. It's going to be a completely different world than what we've seen in the last 6 to 10 years. But from a campaign perspective, it goes down to resources as well. I think right now we're looking at potentially a net loss in the Senate. Doesn't quite get them there. It gets them to that bonding limit where they can deal with bond issues and stuff. But there was the one thing that we were looking for and we're really concerned about because of essentially the surge of Democratic voters during the presidential is, will they be able to take supermajorities in both the houses? And from our assessment right now, I don't think they can get there. There's a couple races that are because there's so many thousands of votes still out. We're going to be watching for the next week, if not longer. One would be Ron Mazzal in the 10th district, which he's currently got a very small loss, but a lot of our assessment shows that there's a lot more conservative voters that were voting late in that one, so they might be able to hold that one. I don't think they'll be able to hold the 18th was Don Benton in the Senate. That was an open seat, and so they're potentially looking at a one net loss or a 2 net loss. But Democrats needed to get to 33 to get to that supermajority, which they can suspend the rules, run tax measures, et cetera. Right now, they're teetering on that 60%. So.
And which legislative races are you watching?
Same races. Also the races in Yakima, I think were interesting and probably at least right now, look like a happier Republican story there.
That's east of the Cascade.
Yeah. Where just these districts got redrawn by a judge to make them more democratic. The justification being that there was a decision that we needed to give Latinos in those areas better representation, but it looks like in those races, at least right now, Republicans are winning those hotly contested, and there was a lot of money that got poured into those seats. And now I will say I've been talking to some of my Democratic Senate campaign and counterparts who are saying they haven't thrown in the towel yet, right, on some of those races. There's still a lot of votes to be counted. There was a lot of late voting, so maybe things could change. But at least right now, it looks like the Republicans had holes.
And that race, especially in the Yakima being a Latino race, I mean, that's one of those races, most of the time when national politics happens, it doesn't have that much effect in Washington. I mean, we did have, higher Democratic turnouts on the west side of the Cascades, but it's interesting to see as we analyze this moving forward is what did those Latinos do? Because nationwide we saw that, essentially Trump was taking 45% of Latino votes. So that might have had an impact, a positive impact to hold those seats in the 14th. So
there is a shift going on nationally, I think, that we can talk more about what happened nationally. But and I think it's a real topic of concern for the Democratic Party going forward about why are we losing more, particularly non-college educated Latino or Black, mostly men, but why are we losing those voters that have traditionally been a really, really strong part of our base? And I think that's alarming if you're a Democrat, right? If those trends continue, the demographics start to look tough for us, and you could maybe even in places like Washington State, in parts of Washington State, you could see Republicans making gains.
What about Southwest Washington and some of the, you mentioned the 18th district too?
Yeah, 18th and 17th were the big targets down there.
So again, to stress, this is the day after.
Yeah.
So the
Very
initial
close
count's
races.
in,
Yeah.
there are at this moment 4 races within about a percentage point. 3 House races, 1 Senate race, and then the dynamics are flipped in those. There are 2 Democrats leading in those and 2 Republicans leading in those. Very interesting.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
Well, these races are way too close to call. I think, as Justin was saying, there's a lot of votes left. And we do, in Southwest Washington, tend to see a red shift in the later ballots, particularly in presidential years, right? So also in the congressional race there, right? Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez is up 4 points over Joe Kent. That will probably tighten a little bit as the later counts come in. I think she'll be fine and will still hang on, but that's something you got to watch, right? And so I do think right now we're looking at potentially 2 Democratic pickups on the Senate side overall and 2 on the House side, but those two
it'll get tighter.
They could evaporate, right? I mean, between now and when the final ballots are counted, we're not it's not a done deal yet.
In the reports from what they reported last night, and of course with mail coming in today and late ballot drops, right now they're at 70,000 ballots still out just in Clark County alone. And what we found out, and especially looking at some of the annexes, is long lines of people trying to drop ballots off. And in Pierce County, for example, at one point there was literally like 400 people trying to drop ballots off. And a common, when we were talking to folks, a common reason why are you waiting so long? Why are you dropping off? And they were scared to put their ballots in the ballot boxes because of the fires, especially down there in Vancouver. That's where the fires were.
Yeah.
So people were worried about tampering with that, and they were waiting till the last minute to vote. So you're going to see some potential shifts in that based on the amount of numbers coming in at the end. So
bottom line, though, I just got to say, I mean, Democrats already had large majorities in both houses, and if anything, it looks like for sure we're going to gain 1 House seat and maybe a second one, and maybe 2 Senate seats here. So even though we're not getting to the full supermajority levels, I mean, the Democratic dominance in Olympia is being reaffirmed. And I think what we're also seeing is, to Justin's point about the faces in the caucuses changing, we're seeing polarization continue, right? And the Republicans are getting more, ideologically red, and I think the Democratic caucuses are getting more progressive too. So
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think when we start looking at the layout in the Senate especially, I mean, if it gets like to a 1 or 2 vote supermajority, they're gonna go after those that might be considered more moderate Democrats to make sure they hold. And so I'm thinking somebody like a Mike Chapman will be very powerful for his vote, especially when it gets down to that 2/3.
I was going to ask about the trend towards, the shrinking moderate population in Olympia, as is sometimes commented on. So are moderates an endangered species in Olympia based on what you said?
increasingly so, I think. Yeah, I mean, when you look at this last cycle, who left? Mark Mullet, right? Who left the Senate? Kevin Vanderway, right? Who left to run for
J.T. Wilcox.
J.T. Wilcox on the Republican side, right? A real moderating influence and figure on the Republican side. So and the people that are replacing them are more kind of mainstream, within the kind of orthodoxies of where the parties are. And so yes, I do think there's a deepening of the kind of ideological split that exists between the two parties, and I do think moderation is in short supply.
Speaking of sort of national and state implications here, this is maybe a tenuous connection, but you've got over in the 4th Congressional District, you've got the incumbent Republican, Dan Newhouse, and you've got the challenger Republican, Jared Sessler.
It was endorsed by Trump.
So what's your take on sort of the intra-party rivalries, if you will, or the rift over that they connected to President Trump?
And it went back to the primary too, with Simi Bird running against Reichert too. I think at the end of the day, in the numbers, everybody came together to support one candidate. That one is a little bit different. I mean, we had a couple races. I mean, you guys had a couple races, Dem on Dems. In majority of those, the more conservative candidate got through, even with potential Dems being able to vote in that ballot. That one is the exception. So Newhouse is holding, and most likely will hold. But I mean, you probably seeing it on the Democratic side as well. I mean, there's definitely a challenge within the parties to make sure that they pick the right candidate to pick the right seats. And some of those seats that we had candidates who were way too conservative to win a moderate purple seat. So.
Right. I mean, there was a real concerted effort on the part of what we might call the Republican establishment, right, to try to get more electable candidates into those races, and that effort pretty much flopped in the primary.
Yeah,
they got wiped out.
Most of the moderates went down.
Yeah.
So, and then to clarify, I referred to President Trump, meaning mainly because the controversy had to do with votes taken when Trump was president by some our congressional delegates here who happen to be Republicans. Okay, so in looking at the initiatives went down, or the initiatives appear to be going down. One may pass, and the Democrats look to expand their majorities to some extent in Olympia, certainly not losing ground based on early. The combination of those things, do you see that as, you mentioned it's sort of an endorsement, will that energize the progressive Democratic wing of the party to do more, go further?
Yeah, there's one person that's going to energize the Democratic base in Washington State, and that's Trump. Just got reelected. So,
Totally true.
since 2016, I mean, and I worked for the Senate when we had the majority. Since 2016, I mean, the first special election that we had was a moratorium on Trump in 2017. On that special election where we were trying to hold the majority, was a seat that he got 26% in. Our candidate got 44%, but you can't win a seat that your national politics moves on that. And so for us, like from a Washington standpoint, the challenge is going to be for the next 4 years is how is he doing? Did he fix the economy? Did he do everything he said? Because if he does things that are independent based. I mean, we have districts here that are more independent than have Republicans or Democrats, and how they perceive the president affects all of those down ticket races. And so instead of Trump going away and being able to focus on issues like crime and the economy and everything, like for the most part, at every door we're talking like, are you going to support Trump? You're not going to support Trump. So from a swing perspective on those campaigns, you're already losing. And so we're going to have to contend with that for the next 4 years.
Yeah.
And it is going to energize their base. I mean, Ferguson, his rise to power was how many times he could sue Trump. And so we're going to see a lot of
99 lawsuits, right? Yeah.
So-
yeah. No, I do think that there was already significant energy on the progressive side in Olympia. I do think Trump getting elected probably juices that. I think as long as Trump is in the news, it's terrible news for Republicans in Washington State. He is a uniquely toxic and polarizing figure in blue places like the state that we live in. But it's not, so I think we're going to see a real conversation around revenue in this upcoming session. The talks building around that. I think you're going to see a big battle coming about rent control. So some of these sort of progressive, priorities are going to be sort of front and center in this upcoming ledge session. And again, it's not just that we've got these legislative majorities, but we kind of swept on the Democratic side in terms of the executive offices. You've got a new governor coming in, Bob Ferguson. Even, Nick Brown, the new attorney general, I worked on that race, and I worked on with Dave Updegrove as lands commissioner. So you got some new faces coming into the executive positions, and they're going to be moving to make their marks, and I think you're going to see a lot of movement.
Now
Can I pause you? We're within about a minute, so if you want to transition to closing, we can stretch to 1:30.
Okay.
That's all right.
Sure.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Well, just going back to some of the issues that we're going to see, especially, and it's going to, the Democrats are going to have to hold back what they want to do. One of the things we potentially will see is something we saw in 2010, which allowed a big shift in power, and that's the discussion of an income tax in Washington. So there's a lot in that Democratic caucus that want it, and now they have the votes to potentially get it close, and so we might see that moving forward. But can they hide behind Trump as they're moving their agenda forward? So that's going to be a wait to see mode. So,
And if you'll close us out here.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think we're going to see at least much of a public discussion around an income tax. I mean, we just defended the capital gains tax, right, in this initiative battle that we had, and in fact, part of one of the Haywood measures
you're
that
going
never
to have
made
to call
it.
us back.
One of the Haywood measures that never made it to the ballot was the one that said we're barring income taxes in Washington State, right? In the legislature last session, Democrats included, passed that measure, and the reason I think Democrats felt free to pass that is because they really saw it as a message, bill or initiative, that there's no real energy or support for actually doing an income tax in Washington State. I mean, Republicans like to say that cap gains tax is an income tax, but voters...
The IRS says that.
Yeah, but the voters here clearly see it differently, right?
Yeah.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you both again. Sandeep, Justin, we do appreciate your time and your perspectives.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure.
Still ahead, the Boeing strike is over. A look at how the contract dispute played out and what that means for the economy. Details after the break.
When I showed up, there were dead bees everywhere. What the heck happened? The murder hornet. If we're able to stop this thing and keep it isolated right here and wipe them out right now while we can, that's our best bet. Because if we're not able to and it spreads, then the chances of us getting rid of this thing is going to be slim.
After 7 weeks, the Boeing strike is officially over. The 53-day strike directly affected 33,000 machinists who work for Boeing in Washington, Oregon, and California. But the ripple effect was felt around the country at companies that supply and support the aerospace giant. Members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers approved the third contract offer from Boeing, which includes a 38% wage increase over 4 years. Some analysts estimate the 7-week strike cost Boeing $3 billion. The Impact is available online in video and podcast form at tvw.org. Follow us on X at The Impact TVW. We'll be back next week with more in-depth interviews you won't find anywhere else. Please join us then. I'm Mike McClanahan. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.